Welcome to today's Conversation Map Tools Diabetes Specialized Care Center Program Overview. Today, our goal is to look at the makeup of the Facilitator's Guide, go through the Conversation Map methodology, the role of the coach, and then the content of each of the guides which you will be responsible for as we move forward. Again, this is a program sponsored by Cardinal Health, designed exclusively by Healthy Interactions for use with independent pharmacists across the United States. Today's agenda includes, we'll give you a brief introduction of the players involved, give you a high-level overview of the program, an overview of the Facilitator's Guide, how to start a session, what's required during the session, what to do after a session, and then an overview of each of the Conversation Map tools. We will provide an opportunity for you to submit questions to our email site as you go through this process. So as you have a question, if you think of something, just write it down. If you want to refer to a particular slide number or page number in the program, please feel free to do so. My name is Chris Hohenberger. I'm a map developer for Healthy Interactions. I've been doing the development of maps now for about 25 years, working with a number of organizations around the globe in a lot or many different scenarios, whether it be the IT industry, in the healthcare industry, retail industry, in manufacturing, etc., around the globe, and with a number of different audiences. Whether that be employee groups, educators, community folks, patient groups, students, etc. So I have a lot of experience in not only making the maps, but in the implementation process for the map process and program. Again, the client is Cardinal Health, and their development team who assisted in creating the maps were Sarah Truesdale and Samantha Hoy. In this particular program, there are 4 Conversation Map tools. 3 of those Conversation Map tools are for use by the patients themselves, and they deal with managing diabetes and either medications, monitoring, or healthy eating and exercise. The very first tool that you will encounter, though, is a map tool designed exclusively for the independent pharmacy staff. And the purpose of that map is essentially to create alignment around the store and the staff members as to why they are pursuing group education for diabetes consumers and why it makes sense given the market dynamics that the independent pharmacy store is encountering. Many of you have already facilitated conversation maps over the years. It is the same methodology. While the map methodology is the same, we are asking you to do more as contract facilitators in this program. We're asking you to essentially be a program manager, helping the stores in the setup and the implementation of the maps themselves. So everything from helping them identify a space in which to run these sessions, when to run them, what types of patient groups might be appropriate for them to go out and recruit, what type of marketing might be useful, what type of support they need as they go through the process. That's going to be your role as a contract facilitator in this Diabetes Specialized Care program. The Conversation Map tools are an integral part of that program, and it's our desire that they add value to the pharmacy by delivering a critical service to the diabetes consumer and patient. All right, by this time, hopefully many of you have already received your facilitator guides for each of the maps. So there should be 4 facilitator guides, one for the pharmacy staff map and then one for each of the patient maps. You'll notice if you've gone through and looked at those that the front portion of each of those guide booklets is the same. The only thing that is different is that around page 9 of the guide booklet, which begins to talk about the particular map in question and the content of those maps. So let me take you through that. First of all, I'm going to give you an overview of the conversation map methodology, and that is contained in pages 1 through 4 of the guide booklet, and that should look like the following. So page 1 talks about an overview of the methodology. We give you a nice chart there on the why behind the utilization of an interactive process. We talk about the various components of the conversation map methodology and what the role of the coach is. So let me back up just a little bit though. Let me talk a little bit about how the maps were originally discovered and came to be a tool for use in essentially conveying a large amount of complex information to a large number of people. The maps themselves did not come out of the education world at all. They came out of the business world. You see, it started with a small business strategy company in Northwest Ohio, and our goal and our task, typically with most organizations along the northern portion of Ohio and the southern portion of Michigan, was to go out, sit down with business leaders, look at the market trends and the forces of change that were impacting a particular business, talk about how they should respond, and put together a strategy that that organization could take and implement to master the change that was coming at them. Well, we'd usually put together a nice 2 or 3 inch leather embossed binder, slapped each other on the back, and walked away. Later, we had this brilliant idea of going back to each of these organizations to find out just what value did we add to them, how much change had occurred in the organization, and how well had they executed the strategy. Well, much to our chagrin, as we went back to these organizations, invariably every single one of them, the same thing occurred. These nice strategies that we had spent so much time together putting together were sitting on somebody's shelf collecting dust. Nothing had changed. The only thing that was different for the organization was that all those forces of change which were beating on their door were now knocking ever louder. So we began to question our value to the organization and just how could we help them move forward. And as we began to look at the organizations, a common occurrence was present in each of the businesses. What we found were leaders on one side of the fence, so to speak, who had their eyes on the marketplace. They could see the forces of change coming at them, whether that is technological changes, regulatory changes, consumer trends that were forcing the business to move in a particular direction. The problem was they didn't have their hands on the levers of change. They weren't the people who actually touched the product day in and day out. They didn't talk to the consumer day in and day out. Therefore, they could not impact its price or its quality. On the other side of the coin, those people who did talk to the customer, who did touch the product, the doers of the world, their problem is they had the hands on the levers of change, but they couldn't see where they were going or where they needed to go. And so for us, the task became, how do we take the information which was in leadership's heads and get it out into everybody else's hands so that change could occur? Well, for most of the organization, the barrier to that taking of information and putting it in the hands of everybody in the organization came down to time and money. For example, McDonald's Corporation had 1 million people around the globe with a turnover ratio of 200%. They churned through 3 million employees each and every year. There was no way they could take those people off the front line and counters of their stores, put them in a traditional classroom setting, and teach them the ins and outs of the business of running a restaurant. So for us, it became an opportunity to look for ways to shrink wrap learning, to shrink it down into a time conducive manner that everybody in the organization to look at the same information, the same data that leadership looked at, and be able to come to the same conclusion. So we became enamored with the idea of how do people learn. And we went back and we looked at a couple of different things. And not being educators ourselves, we were business people, but we did know how to research. So we went back and we looked. And what we discovered were some pretty old principles that had stayed and had been tested over time and were still relevant even today. The first one was a principle by a guy named Aristotle. And Aristotle's comment was that the soul never thinks without a picture. Alan Kay from Xerox Computers put it a little bit differently. Alan said, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, a visual metaphor is worth 1,000 pictures. So this whole idea of utilizing visuals to convey a story to help create linkages in learning resonated with us. The Catholic Church had done it for years with their stained glass windows. That's how they communicated to their population, who in large part were illiterate. The second component was to look back at another guy who had been around for a long time, a guy by the name of Socrates. And Socrates' component or concept was that there are no right or wrong answers. There's just better questions. And if you can continue to ask the right questions, you can peel away and get to the core truth. So we hung on to these concepts and we started to play around with them a little bit. And then it all kind of crystallized for us when we were doing some work with a thought tank group over in Scandinavia, the Foresight group. And these were business leaders from around the globe who got together periodically to talk about trends and futuristic issues that were going on or that could lead the world and the global business place in different directions. And we encountered a guy by the name of Jan Carlson. And Jan Carlson was the CEO of SAS Airlines, Scandinavian Airlines. And he was also the author of a book called The Moments of Truth. And Jan's comment to us was that, you know, as I listen to all of you talk about the troubles and the travails of your businesses that you encounter, mine's much different. And he began to tell us what was going on at SAS Airlines. He said, for us, we had just gotten done overcoming bankruptcy. We were literally on the verge of closing the doors and sending everybody away without a job. But we were able to successfully develop some financing, turn the company around, and became profitable last year. Our challenge, though, is I can't get the cheering to stop. And we asked him, what do you mean? And he said, look, the world we just conquered at SAS Airlines was a regulated marketplace. This year, they're going to deregulate the European marketplace. There will no longer be government-owned airlines. We will now have true competitors. We will now have true customers. We will now have to worry about this thing called profitability and shareholders. I need my people to understand and recognize what is key and what is important in those aspects. And every time I get up to tell them about the marketplace change, I get the same thing. I get a lot of nodding of the head and a lot of saluting Jan Carlson because I'm the leader. But ultimately, all of these people walk out the door and they're going to act on their own conclusions. They will tolerate me as a leader, but they will act on their own conclusions. And for us, it was like a light bulb going off. It was how do we take and allow people to take all the information which is in leadership's head or in the content expert's head, the healthcare practitioner's head, and disseminate it out into a format that everybody can get their hands around and come to their own conclusions. If the data and information that is encountered by leadership and the experts is true and accurate, those who encounter it will come to the same conclusion. And so for us, that ultimately ended up in the conversation map tool. And if you encountered the tool, as you well know, it does incorporate all of those key principles. It incorporates visualization, the visualization of a complex system. So if we're talking about the pharmacy marketplace, the visual lays out in a visual or artistic metaphor that framework. It frames the story. It helps people use a common language to talk about the same things. Embedded within most of those visuals will be data connections, charts and information, USA Today types of graphics. These tell a story, and when linked with the visuals, can help form a powerful bond. To help people go through that visual and those data connections are the Socratic dialogue questions. Questions that do not have a right or wrong answer, but simply evoke people's opinions, their insights, their experiences, so that they can share them with one another around the table. To add to that learning component, we also offer learning peripherals, which are simply additional data points which add another context or layer of learning for the people. That if X, Y, and Z is true, what happens when you introduce point A or point B? So it allows people to take additional information and rethink their initial assumptions. Of course, all of this is done in a small group setting where people can share in a format that is non-threatening, easy to engage in. It's usually made up of between 6 and 8 individuals. Typically, we recommend no more than 10. If you get more than 10 people, it's very difficult for the facilitator to keep the conversation on track and to make sure there's no splinter conversations. This way everybody can participate as well. Of course, the key to all of this is good facilitation. Facilitator who is allowing people to go on the journey of exploration as opposed to telling them how great the story is or what they should think or what they should know. Let me reiterate that. It is about a facilitator who is going to allow the group to go on their own exploration and not simply tell them what they need to know. I'll talk more about this in a moment. Finally, every conversation map concludes with action planning, where we take all of the learnings from the day's session, allow people to formulate their own individualized goals so that behaviors can become modified and move forward. That's the methodology, and that's what's set forth in pages 1 through 4 of the guide booklet. Talks about the actual role of the coach, what to do before a session, what to do during a session, and what to do after a session. So you will see in pages Roman numeral 4 through Roman numeral 8, all those components, before, during, and after the session. I'm going to come back to those in just a second. The next part of the facilitator's guide, though, is important because this is your checklist on page 1 of every guide booklet. It's a small picture of the map and then a checklist of the materials. This will become critical to you because as you arrive at each session, you're going to want to check off and make sure you have everything you need in your kit. I'll come back to that as well. The next page, page 2, through the remainder of the guide booklet, is what I like to refer to as the teacher's handbook. This is the series of questions that you will read. Let me say that again. This is the series of questions that you will read. If you just stick to the script and read the conversation questions that are laid out on pages 2 through the remainder of the booklet, everything in the process will go right. If you did nothing more than that, if you did nothing more than just simply read each question and stopped when it needed to be discussed, or stopped and handed out a card where it tells you to hand out a card, and just followed the script, the map session would work fine. But we want you to be more than fine. So we're going to talk about the role of the coach and what to do. Now, the other part of the facilitator's guide and why I call it the handbook is because we also put in there actual pictures of the cards that you will go through and need to hand out as you go through the process. Plus, as you'll see on the screen there, there's various places where we have facilitator tips, and we'll tell you what to do with each of the cards. So that's how your booklet is made up. We'll go through it in detail in the upcoming moments here, but let me take you back now to what to do before, during, and after a session. All right. Before you come to a session, the first thing I would do is I would check my kit and go through that checklist that I showed you on page 1 of every guide booklet where it has the picture of the map. Go through that checklist of materials. Make sure you have the map. Make sure you have each and every card. Make sure you have the right number of cards. After you get, what happens is typically the very first time out, everything's been checked, you're going to have the materials you need. But as you use that map over and over again, there's always the possibility that a card could get mislaid or lost. You want to at least have an opportunity to replace that card. So always review your materials ahead of time. A day ahead would not be too early. On the day of the session, you're going to want to arrive to prepare the workspace. By that, what I mean is you're going to want to make sure that the chairs and the table are set up accordingly. Typically, the way I set up a table in a session is I have the facilitator on one side of the table and the participants seated in a U-shape, engaged oftentimes than those in the middle. If you have an opportunity to switch seats during the session, feel free to do so. I would always encourage people to get up and move around to see the map better, to give themselves an opportunity to catch all the particulars of the visual image and the data itself. So, typically when I set up a session, I lay my cards out, I put the map face down. You don't have to, it's just an idea, and it's something I've found useful over the years, lay it face down. It creates a little bit of anticipation, a little bit of excitement and the unknown for the people who are going to go through the process. They're wondering what it's all about, and it can help you as you go forward so that they're not looking at the picture and trying to decipher what it means before you actually engage in it through going through the questions. Next, after you've got the map set up, you've got your cards laid out, you've got your participants seated around the map table, you may want to have name tags for them, which is great. If not, you certainly want to begin the process by one, explaining what they're going to go through. So tell them what the agenda is for the morning or the afternoon or the evening. Indicate we're going to go through a brief introduction. We're going to go through part A of the map, which may take 30 minutes. We'll go through the second part of the map, which may take 30 minutes. Whatever that time frame is, whatever you have set it up for, just to explain to them how the timing is going to go. Then I would create a relaxed and non-threatening environment. By that, what I mean is ask each of the group members to introduce themselves, perhaps ask some type of icebreaker question, something to get acquainted with one another, things such as, where'd you go on vacation last year, what's your favorite car, what's your favorite vacation spot, things like that, which just gets them used to speaking to one another in the session and gets a little bit of harmony created amongst the group. Once the session starts, you're going to want to set the context of what they're going to be going through. And that's, again, done for you if you follow the script. If you follow the script on page 2 of the guide, it will do this for you. It will set the context for what they're going to go through in the learning or the conversation map process. Number 2, and I can't reiterate this enough, it's almost like most people will talk to me about, how can I be a really great facilitator? Well, to be a good facilitator, all you need to do is follow the script. Read the script verbatim. And if you do everything that's in there, you'll be a good facilitator. To be a great facilitator, all you need to do are the things I'm going to take you through in the next few pages. Control the peripheral cards. What do I mean by this? In some of these sections that you go through, there will be cards. And I'm going to scroll down here and show you an example in just a second. There will be cards with lots of written information on them. It's difficult if you hand these cards out to 5 different people all at the same time. It's going to be a difficult process for you to get a lot out of the people in this group setting, because what's going to happen is, as the first person's reading card number 1, the other 4 people are going to be reading their own card. They're not going to be paying attention to what the first person did. So what I would suggest is hand these cards out one at a time, let one person read the information, place it down at the center of the map. Or have all 5 cards handed out to one person so that the one person's doing all the reading and everybody else is listening. But it's key that you have only one person and one card out at a time so that everybody else can engage in the process. Now, this card actually gives me an opportunity to talk about the other part of controlling the cards, and that is this. Some card exercises are matching exercises and therefore have a right or wrong answer. Typically what we suggest doing is to let them go through and match their cards to a particular spot. I think card number 1 ought to go on this stop, 2 on this stop. And as they're placing the cards, ask them why. Why do you think it should go there? And get them to explain. Get them to put their initial assumptions about the correct answer out on the table. Once they're got them all matched, say, is everybody happy with where the placements are? And if they say yes, say, okay, let me tell you which ones you have correct. Notice I said correct, not wrong. Tell them which ones they have correct, because let's say they only card number 1 and card number 5 were correct. Well, they now have to go back and have to start questioning themselves and one another over why isn't 2, 3, and 4 where we thought they were? What is it about that placement that's wrong? And it basically forces them to question their initial assumptions. They begin the thought process to reiterate, where did I go wrong? Where perhaps do I need to look at this differently? So I would go through that a second time. Say you need to work on items 2, 3, and 4. Let them have one more crack at it. After they've gone through that twice, then I would tell them where they need to place the cards. But at least give them 2 go-throughs in the card placements. That's what we mean by controlling the cards. All right. Probably the most important task you have as a facilitator is to keep them focused and on time. You want to be in general control of the learning process. You're not giving orders. You're not directing the flow of the discussion. You're not a teacher. You're a facilitator. So you basically want to make sure that they stay on topic, and if they wander off, all you have to do is basically reread the question or rephrase it in your own words what that question was. Feel free to remind them about time constraints. That, look, if we want to get done here by 9 o'clock, we have to be, move on to the next question. Just very simple, very gentle control of the process. You're going to want to interject your own enthusiasm into the process. You want to maintain a high energy level. This will be especially true if you've got a group who's running in the evening, perhaps after dinner, or in the afternoon after lunch, where because they've eaten, they're a little bit slower process. You want to engage them a little bit. And so your own enthusiasm in the process can make a big difference. If you sit back and are looking at your watch or looking off into space, chances are they will be less engaged in the process. The more you lean in, the more you make eye contact with a participant, the more they will talk. The more energy you have. You can stand up in the group. Ask the group to stand up with you. When you sit down, they'll sit down. It's an amazing thing to watch adult learners go through this process. They will follow you because they're so used to the old rote method of disseminating information in the old teacher process. This is different. You want to engage them. Let them move around a little bit. That gets their energy level moving as well. Listen actively. Listen to what they are saying. If somebody makes a great comment, restate it. Or say, ask the person to restate it. Could you say that one more time, Susan? That was interesting. What did you say? Did everybody hear that? And so as things are put out there, reiterate them. Explore comments. If somebody puts out a short answer, say, oh, can you give me an example of that? Can you explain what you mean by that? If somebody puts out an acronym, ADA, what's ADA mean? You may very well know the answer to that. That's not the point. You want to become the student and have the student become the teacher. They will tell you all kinds of things as long as you encourage them to talk. Get them to voice and expand upon different concepts and different conclusions. Sometimes in groups, you're going to have people who talk too little and people who talk too much. What do you do? What do you do if somebody becomes disruptive? Typically, in your patient settings, what you will have is the person who is either too quiet, in which case the easy way to do or handle that is simply to probe a little bit to see if it's that they're shy, that they're not engaged, or it may be the way they learn, which is fine. But you're not going to know that until you ask. So if you got a person who's not participating, at a simple break in the conversation, say, John, what do you think about that? Do you know of any examples of X, Y, or Z? And just kind of try and gently pull them into the conversation. If they stay quiet, mark that in the back of your head that this is a person who maybe is an auditory learner. They like to listen, and that's fine. But again, you're not going to know that until you probe a little bit. But if they just give you a short one-answer question or an I don't know, that means they're not a person who likes to talk a lot. That doesn't mean they're not learning. It just means they don't like to talk, and that's fine. It also is an opportunity for you to use the cards as a means of pulling that person into the process. Have them read a card periodically. Next, what do you do with the person who talks too much? A lot of times the person who is talking too much is someone who is either, they could very well be seated right at the center of the map, and because they see everything better, they want to talk more, and that's okay. But it also is, they just have a habit of taking things over. A couple of ways around that is I would give them as much reading to do as possible. So all the cards, give them the cards to read because they like to hear their voice. So let them do the reading. Secondly, don't make eye contact with them. The more eye contact you make with a person as they're speaking, the more likely they are to engage in the conversation. Deviate from that. Look off to another place. Look down at your questions. They'll begin to understand that, oh, maybe what I'm saying isn't all that right. So maybe I shouldn't say as much. And they'll back off a little bit. So that's a way to handle it as well. The other thing you can do, as I said before, if they are seated in the middle of the table, move them around. If they're seated on the side, that might handle some of the vocalization as well. Avoiding teacher-pupil responses. What do we mean by that? What you want to do is, as a question is asked, if one participant gives an answer, you don't want to say correct or great answer, because what you've told the rest of the people around the table, don't bother participating, we just got the right answer. So instead say, oh, okay, good input. All right. Anybody else? Anybody else have anything to offer? Always looking for an opportunity to pull other people into the process. The next item is a process that has worked for me time and again. Silence can be golden. That was 5 seconds. And I'm sure all of you thought, uh-oh, what just happened to my technology? Did it just go blank? You started to get nervous. The same thing happens in a group setting. If you're quiet and you just let that pregnant pause occur, it is a great catalyst for people to jump in and talk. I once did it with a group of union workers at the end of a shift, at the end of a week, and I sat there for 30 to 60 seconds, didn't say a word as the question was on the table, until somebody finally chimed in. And once the one person chimed in, it was like the floodgates opened, because they probably thought, if they don't talk, this fool of a facilitator is going to keep me here all day. So silence can be golden and can be a great catalyst for getting people to engage in the process. All right. As much as possible, try to avoid providing answers, comments, or opinions. This is the most difficult process I have seen healthcare educators encounter as they go through the conversation map. I know we need healthcare providers and educators to be present due to the nature of the subject. But the more you talk, the less they talk. The more you feel like you have to give them the answer, as opposed to asking a question which can lead them to an answer, the lower the value of the map process. Let me give you an example. About 8 years ago, I had an opportunity to do a map session on education in the United States. It was all about the big picture of education. And the map was going to be utilized with 200 individuals in an evening session from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. The audience was going to be teachers, administrators, students, parents, business people, empty nesters, essentially the community. And they were going to talk about all the trends that were impacting education, and given these trends, where do we need to move our school? Well, we had 200 people, so we were going to have 20 tables, and we needed 20 facilitators. So the school who was hosting the session asked if they could use their honors students, the seniors in the class. They had 25 of them. They offered 20. If they could be facilitators. And we said, sure, great. That's a great use of the kids. Get them involved in the process. Well, on the day of the actual session, we were going to train the 20 students in the morning so they could be a facilitator and go through the session. Well, there's only one problem. 2 of the kids called in sick that day. So we were short by 2, and we had to get a last-minute replacement. So an assistant principal of the high school and a principal of an elementary school said, we'll facilitate, we'll help you out. So we trained all 20 people. Went to the session at 6 in the evening. For a 2-hour span of time, 180 people, 18 tables, had great conversations. Great conversation. People were engaged. People were laughing. People were talking. People were coming up with ideas about where to move the school. 2 tables, had 20 people nodding their head. I'm sure you've already guessed which 2 they were. They were the principal and the assistant principal. The people who were in a leadership, who were in a content expert position, who felt like they had to tell the story as opposed to allowing people to go on exploration on their own. To move from that good facilitator to that great facilitator, it's all about taking your expertise and finding a way to ask a question to lead people to the conclusion they need to get to with the data, which is before them. So utilizing hypothetical questions, using example questions. Say, if John did this with his eating habits, if he had 3 Snickers bars before he ate, that you'll know because you're the expert in a way, in a format that allows people to come to their own conclusion. That's the key to great facilitation. Now, obviously, there's going to be occasions where they just can't get it, and you certainly don't want to leave the table with that happening. My suggestion would be this. I would go through the MAP process, and if there's been 1 or 2 misstatements or miscalculations, I would let it go through the process, because sometimes people have an aha after they get the 5th, 6th, 7th piece of information as opposed to that 1st or 2nd, and it takes them a little bit of time to think through it. I would let them go through it, but at a convenient point, at a break, at the end of the session, say, you know what, there were a couple things I just want to correct you on. There was this statement made, and actually it's this, and here's why it is. I wouldn't let them leave the table with the wrong answer, but I would at least allow them to go through the process first to see if they couldn't get there on their own before I shared with the input. That's my expert facilitation comment for the day. All right. There will be times, as I indicated in our initial webinar, each of the conversation maps that you'll be utilizing is engineered to be 2 hours long. You can break those up into meaningful sections, such as if you wanted to do a 1-hour session, that's fine. You can do 2-hour sessions, that's fine. It's going to probably be a function of whether or not defined in the managing diabetes and medications, as well as in the monitoring. You may want to skip 1 or 2 myth or fact cards. That's fine. It's not going to hurt the process at all by cutting down 1 or 2 cards like that. Obviously, you can't skip a card if you're doing a matching exercise, so that wouldn't be a relevant method to do. You might be able to skip a question or 2 if it seems redundant or it's already been covered in some way, shape, or form earlier in the conversation. That's a possibility. Thirdly, and this is probably the one that's probably easiest for you to do and will save you the most time. As you go through the guides, there will be some questions that will just be intuitive to you. You'll know what the next question is. Or as you're actually in the session and you look down, you see what the question is. Instead of going back and reading it verbatim, paraphrase the question. If you know what the next question is all about and the content of it and where the group is supposed to be going, just ask the question without reading it. That's fine. There's no rule against that. As long as you stick to the basic flow of the guide booklet, you'll be fine. All right. What do you do after the session? Well, you're going to distribute the handouts and collect any feedback, suggestions, or ideas. So again, each of the guides, facilitator guides and kits have satisfaction surveys that we will ask you to have the patients complete at that point in time. Have them fill it out, collect it right then and there. If there's unanswered questions, if there's a question that had a wrong answer left out there, now is the time to answer those or address those concerns. Obviously, you always want to lead by expressing your appreciation to the group member. You might even want to offer an opportunity for them to give some feedback as to what they liked, what they didn't like about the session. It may be able to offer you some guidance on how you run the next session. It's also a good opportunity if the pharmacy staff people have decided to attend a session, they may have a question or 2 that they want to ask the consumers, the diabetes patient. How can we better serve you? What is it Walgreens is doing that we're not doing? Those types of questions are great questions to have a little bit of a conversation about at the end of the session. Feel free to do so. Okay, What I've just taken you through there on pages 4 through 8 is all about the role of the coach and the facilitator. If you are dealing with a Tier 2 pharmacy and your task is to train their individual staff member, one or more, to be a facilitator, what you're going to do is at the conclusion of the pharmacy staff map, you are going to take an hour and you're going to walk them through what I just walked you through from page Roman numeral 1 through Roman numeral 8. I would take them through that information. Tell them a little bit about the process, about the 7 components of a conversation map, and then what to do before a session, what to do during a session, and what to do after a session. That's how you're going to train the trainer, the same way I just took you through. You can use examples. Since you will have just run the pharmacy staff session, use examples of, notice when a question was asked, this is what I ask of you. I ask you to give me an example. That's what we're talking about. So just use your session to reiterate and reinforce the points which are laid out here on pages Roman numeral 1 through Roman numeral 8. Okay. At this point in time, what I'd like to do is take you through the actual content of the particular maps. The first one we're going to start with will be the pharmacy staff map. Now in this one, I've got the entire guide booklet with the beginning question all the way down through the last question laid out for you so that you can see it in total. When I get to the patient maps, and you'll see here, what I'm going to do is walk you through the top of each section, which has an overview of the content we covered in that section. That way we won't go through each and every question verbatim. All right. Let's start with the pharmacy staff map. And again, recall, this map is all about first exploring in sections A, B, and C the pharmacy industry itself. We're going to look at a little bit of history. In the look back section, we're going to look a little bit at the competitive environment in section B, and then we're going to look at the independent pharmacists in section C. In section D and E, that's all about diabetes consumers specifically, and I'll show you how that all works out. In this first section, again, if you did nothing more than just start your reading during this session and just read all the way down to the end of question 3 and have the group respond at that point in time, you're starting off great. That's exactly what you need to do. That's how you start. Read it through. Because if every question 3 is going to be the same, it's going to be have the group stand up and look at the visual, or better yet, what I suggest is that you as a coach just simply hold up the map by its 2 end corners so the group can look at it from a distance. The reason for this is simple. When you hold that map up vertically, such as on a wall, and at a distance from the learner, they can take the entire picture in at one time. And that's great. That's what we want you to do. However, if you held it there forever for the entire session, a critical thing will happen, and that is the level of conversation will die down dramatically because people are talking to a wall and they're not talking to one another as they would be, let's say, seated around a dinner room table having a conversation about the day's events. That's what we're trying to engineer with that map around the table, is that ability to look at one another in the eye, next to one another, laugh, talk about the things that are important to them right there within 1 or 2 feet of one another. But holding that visual up does give them an opportunity to see it all at one time. That's why we do it at the beginning. Take it all in. Tell us what you see so that everybody can see it all at one glance. After they've done that for a couple minutes, put the map back down on the table, because then we're going to start going through it in detail. But tell them, and this would be a great time to reiterate. You've probably already told them to move around, stand up, move around, get a better look. If you're seated on the left side and you need to, we're talking about something on the right side of the map, stand up, walk across, walk around the room, crawl across the table, make it fun for them to, this is a funny thing, it's laid back, it's relaxed. look at the map, get a better view. You don't have to stay glued to that seat. There's nothing that says they have to stay glued to the seat. All right, so this first section in questions 4 through 7, basically what we get them to look at is, let's set the context for what's going on in the healthcare environment as a whole. So we take them kind of at this 100,000 foot level, and we're going to start out high, and then we're going to come down lower and lower and lower until we get into the independent pharmacy store. So we start high, come down low, a funnel approach. First question deals with the flip-flop in the deaths due to chronic disease versus acute disease. We have done such a great job in healthcare over the course of the last 100 years that we have basically eradicated acute conditions as the cause of death to now where people are living longer, and as they live longer in age and due to lifestyle changes, etc., people are dying of chronic conditions. We want them to talk about that. We want them to see that, because that phenomenon, that flip-flop between acute and chronic conditions as a cause of death, has tremendous implications for the healthcare environment. We want them to talk about that. Talk about the challenges that it occurs. They'll talk about things such as it's increased the amount of older people. People are living longer. Of course, as they live longer, they need more healthcare services. As you need more healthcare services, it costs you more, so the cost of healthcare is going up. They'll talk about all those things. The next aspect is to then say, okay, if that's true, what has been the response of the environment, of our society, to those challenges? Well, as healthcare costs have risen in this country, what have we done? We've got third-party payers who are squeezing the providers to be more and more efficient, more and more effective with what they have. Profits are getting smaller. We've got quality outcomes. We want better outcomes for the money we spend. You've had mergers and acquisitions. You've had the star ratings. You've had the Affordable Care Act. You've had increased regulations. So all these issues we want them to talk about, and those are laid out for them on the sign entitled Responding to the Challenge on the left side of the map. Once they've gone through that, and they started to talk about, okay, now I'm starting to understand some of the effects, the responses, now I can begin to see how those are affecting the pharmacy, because all of a sudden if a third-party payer is squeezing reimbursements, as a pharmacy, I'm making less and less money. And what I do in my store, I got to be more effective with, because I got these things called quality outcomes, star ratings that I have to worry about. They'll begin to start to see that. So now we take them down a little bit. From that big 100,000 foot level, now we're down to about 75,000 foot, and we're looking at inside today's pharmacies as a whole. And the first thing we have them look at is a matching exercise on market share. Who are the players? So they're first going to identify the blue boxes across the top right side of the map, and they're going to look at things such as the clinics and the hospitals, the chain stores, your Walgreens, your CVS's, etc., your online mail order channel, your mass merchants, which are the Walgreens, the Costco's, the Targets of the world, your grocery stores, so your Kroger's, your Big Bear grocery stores, etc., all across the United States, the grocery store. And then, of course, the independent pharmacies. And what you're going to do with these cards, what I typically do is I take all 6, and because they're just numbers, there's no real reading that you have to go through, is I just lay them all 6 down at the center of the map and say what we want you to do is match these 6 to one of the 5 competitors or to the independent pharmacist. And that's exactly what your description tells you in point B2. So they're going to match them. Again, this is where you want them to match the first time, let them know which ones they have correct, and for those that they don't have correct, try again, and they will. Once we have those matched, then we have them say, okay, now that I know where the big players are and the small players are, who's winning, who's losing, let's look at why does a consumer go to one of these particular places? What drives them into the doors? So we have on these cards the top 3 reasons why a particular consumer would go into a particular store. So obviously for the independent pharmacist, the thing that they are most widely known for is their staff. They do more with their pharmacy staff than anybody else. They have more of a one-on-one relationship. So they're probably going to get that one. The one which will be a little bit weird for them will probably be the pricing and insurance. But if they think through it, they'll get there. because what they're going to see is the online channel has grown the most over the last 5-10 years. Why? Well, people are being told to go there, and they're being told to go there for one reason. It's all about the dollar. It's all about the price. And so pricing and insurance is the main reason people go to online. They'll begin to sort through that. And what you want them to do is, as they place their cards on one of those 6 players, ask them, why are you placing there? What leads you to believe that? Okay? As they go through this, you're getting them to always, as they look at it, follow the questions, follow the scripts. It'll take you right through it. But basically, you want them to always put themselves into the shoes of the owner of the store. If you're the owner, what are you worried about? If you're the owner, what are you thinking? If you're the owner, where are the opportunities? So always making them feel this ownership of the independent pharmacy store. In section C, we get into the nuts and bolts of the actual consumer. And here we're going to take them down now from the 50,000 foot level or 75,000 foot level to the 50,000 foot level. We're going to look at the independent pharmacy from here on out. And then we start first with describe the independent pharmacy consumer. What do they look like? What's their demographics? What are their race, age, sex, household income, education, insured or not insured? What are they? What do you think? And just say, and again, you always have to remind them that these are national numbers. Let me stress that again. Most of them will immediately go to, I'm in Dallas, so I'm going to think Dallas. You got to pull them back and always say, no, these are national numbers. Now, keep in mind, national numbers. Because if you're in LA, and you're in downtown LA, I guarantee you most of the consumers are probably going to be Hispanic. Well, you got to think from a national standpoint. While Hispanics are growing at a great rate, they're not the majority of the population. So it's kind of a no-brainer when you think about ethnicity from a national level, the white population is going to be your major one. So always kind of remind them that, remember, think nationally, don't think regionally, okay, when they're giving their guesstimates. All right. Once they get the kind of prototype of the consumer down, now you're taking them to a different place. And the next piece is really the key portion of this map. Let me reiterate that. Question C4 through the end of C is the key component of this map. So when you leave this webinar, I would read that section. C4 to the end of C. And what it does is this. In 2013, a year ago, they did a survey of the independent pharmacy customer. Basically what they did is they stood at the door of an independent pharmacy, and as a customer walked in, they said, for what ailment are you here? Okay? They said, for what ailment are you here? Not what do you suffer? They didn't ask them that. They said, why are you here? And they gave, the top 5 answers they gave were hypertension, cholesterol, allergies, pain, and diabetes. If you look to page 6 of your guide booklet, you'll see them all laid out there. Hypertension, cholesterol, allergies, pain, and diabetes. Those were the top 5 reasons that were said. Those are the top 5 volume numbers. So when they get to this card exercise, that's what they're doing. They're matching where are the consumers. Again, this is what they said they were there for. It may not necessarily be why they were truly there. And that will become true here in a second, you'll see. So, once they get matching the numbers of people in each of the disease states that are laid out on your map, once they do that, we then ask them to think about money. And we get them to do that by looking at it in one of 2 ways. We know that in the back end, because of the insurance companies and the Medicare and Medicaid folks, they're putting a lot of pressure on prescription drug sales and basically squeezing that down so that the amount of profit that the stores make on that back end is 23 cents on the dollar. And by gross profit, what we mean is this. It's the cost of the drug that the pharmacist pays, and then its price. So if I sell something for $100 and I have to pay $67 for it, well, I'm only making $23. Okay? So that's what they're looking for. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. It's $77. Excuse me. If I paid $77, I'm only making $23. That's where all the regulations are, is on the back end. On the front end, gross profits are different, because here at the front end is where you're selling the things such as ACE bandages, heating pads, meter strips, the meters themselves, vitamins, all the things that are non-prescription oriented are in the front end of the store. There's a lot more ability of the pharmacist to control the pricing there, so the profitability is different. What we're going to get the people to do in question 6 is to guesstimate. Give their best guess as to how much, if the back end's only making 23 cents on a dollar, how much do you think the front end's making? And just have each and every person give their guesstimate. Because they'll find that out in the next one, or actually in the answer box, which is the end of page 6, you'll see it gives you the answer, which is 38 cents on the dollar. So you make about 1/3 more up front than you do in the back end. So that's where their profit mark. If you're a business owner, that's where you want to sell most of your products, at the front end, because that's where the profit is. So if that's the case, now we get them to look at, all right, if we make more money in the front end, who's buying what of these 5 consumer groups that we just talked about? The diabetic, the cholesterol patient, the hypertension patient, the allergy patient, and the pain. Who's spending the most in the front end? And what the cards do here on page 7 is they identify the top 7 items that each of these customer groups buy, how much they spend annually for different products, and then how much they spend in total for those products. As you can see there, the diabetic supplies for 1, 2, and 3 for diabetes, cholesterol, and hypertension are all the #1 products they're buying. So what's that tell you? It tells you that each consumer has comorbidities. The diabetic consumer's walking in there, and while they may say they have cholesterol, they're there because they have high cholesterol, they're there because they have hypertension, they're really there because they have diabetes. And their #1 purchasing opportunity is on diabetic supplies. So the top 3 groups of patients, or 60-some% of the patients who walk through an independent pharmacist store, are diabetic. That's why it makes all the sense in the world for this particular independent pharmacy store to begin to focus on the diabetic consumer. So at the conclusion of Section C, they ought to be talking about, we ought to focus on the diabetic consumer. That's who we ought to go after, because they're the biggest group and they spend the most money in the area where we make the most money or the most profit. That's why I said that section is so important. If you have any questions on that section, please do not hesitate to send an email to us, and I can respond to any one of them if you want any clarification, any data, etc. Okay. For a lot of the groups, what I did at the end of Section C is I offered them the opportunity to take a break. If they wanted to take a 5 or 10-minute break, you're probably at the 45-minute point to an hour point at this time. If they want to take a break, great. If not, if they just wanted to go through the remainder of the section, I can tell you right now that Section D and E take about 30 minutes. So if you want to let them know that, that's great. Because we end up in Section C with them focusing on the diabetic consumer, Section D picks up right there. And what we want to do is to provide a little bit of knowledge and understanding about what diabetes is and about what the diabetic consumer faces. So we start out in Section D with looking over the definition of diabetes. What is it? How would you define it in your own words is question 1. Question 2 gives them the actual definition. Then we give them a little bit of a very simple visual handout to go through that explains what diabetes is, you know, what a person with diabetes looks like, what a person without diabetes looks like. So they can begin to see what body parts are implicated in the process. First thing we do is, as you can see on page 9, this visual that's at the top of the page is an 11 by 17 handout. Typically what I do is because there will be 2 or 3 of these visuals in the kit, I pass out all 3 so that somebody on the side can see it just as easily as the person at the center. That way everybody can follow along easily. It's a simple visual kind of cartoon display of what diabetes is and what it isn't. The first thing we ask them to do is, you'll notice there are dotted boxes with a single word in each of the dotted boxes, which pertain to a body part or body function. So for instance, you've got pancreas, you've got insulin, you've got glucose, you've got fat, you've got muscles, you've got the liver, all identified in one of those dotted boxes. And the reason we want them first to read those dotted boxes is because we are then going to give them a little bit of a description about how those particular 6 aspects work in diabetes. So we give them then, in question number 4, defining diabetes. We define how the pancreas reacts, the liver, the fat, insulin, blood glucose, and muscles. And they read them as a group, or one person reads them, then as a group they say, oh, that's liver, or that's pancreas, and let them match them. Okay. Usually they won't have too much difficulty, I don't think, in matching these. They just need to sort it through. If you think they're struggling at all, you can get them to, pay attention to the artwork there will help you out as well, and that will guide them through as well. Next, then, what we do is once they have those body parts and body functions described and matched, we then have them actually read what's going on there. And the items, the bullet points 1 through 3 on the blue side and 1 through 3 on the beige side define that. They define it for a person without diabetes and a person with diabetes. Typically what I do is I'll have one person read the blue side, and they'll do the question or the bullets 1, 2, and 3, and then I have them read the question or the quotation boxes. Then I have a separate person or second person read the beige side, and they're going to read again boxes 1, 2, and 3, and then read the quotation boxes. Now, here's a little hint. The quotation boxes, to be most meaningful to them, on the blue side, you should read them from the outside in, so from the left to the right. On the beige side, they should read them from the outside in or from right to left. And they make sense that way. So if you want to read that ahead of time, feel free to do so. Okay. From there, then, we have them engage in an exploration of additional information about diabetes, myth or fact cards. And these are various myth or facts that you can find on the ADA website that talk about things people ought to know about diabetes, and that they, as pharmacists, should have a good handle on. So again, go through these. It's one person reads it, the group shouts out whether they believe it's a myth or a fact. And then there's placeholders along the left side of the map for them to place them. From there, we have the group look at, as they look at the diabetes, as they now have this kind of base set of information on diabetes. Now let's look at a little bit more about the progression of diabetes, from insulin resistance to the progression of diabetes, and the fact that as people go through the condition that, healthy eating and exercise may not be doing the trick in handling their insulin functioning. So they may need to go on medications, whether that's oral and or insulins or other injectables. They may form different complications as they go through the progress of their disease. That's what the card describes on page 12. We want them to ultimately get to, at the bottom of that page, describing some of the complications that can occur for diabetic patients. Everything from eye problems to foot problems to skin complications to neuropathy to kidney disease, high blood pressure, obviously stroke, and gastroparesis. So we want them to talk about that because as independent pharmacists, there will be certain products and services they can offer at the front end to meet some of those complications, and we want them to begin tying thinking like a business person to thinking about adding value for the diabetic consumer. In section E, this is the planning part, and this is really a work group planning component. And this can be utilized whether they're talking about diabetes, whether they're talking about heart conditions, whether they're talking about how they're going to, plan on rebuilding the store. It's an idea generator. And what we first want them to do in question 1 is, now that we've done all this conversation about diabetes and we talked about all the complications, how can we as a store begin to add more value for our store, but more importantly, add more value to the patient with diabetes, especially as they encounter different complications. And so we want somebody to write down ideas generated by the store about how to improve their position with the diabetic consumer, and write 1 idea per card. So you'll have a whole stack of them in the kit. You'll probably go through about 5 to 8 cards, will probably be the max. You may only get 2 or 3, that's okay. But give them a little bit of time to think this through. This is an opportunity for them to think as business people and as obviously providers of services and products to diabetic consumers. Once they've got their 5 or 6, then what you want to do is pull out this 11 by 17 sheet called Supporting the Diabetes Consumer. This is nothing more than a work planning sheet. It basically allows them to take just 1 idea. So if they have 8 out there, say just pick 1. Pick the one that you think is going to give you the most immediate, biggest bang for your dollar. Write that down in activity number 1. They write that down. You may ask them, are there any sub-steps to this? Let me give you an example. Somebody may say, we need to rearrange our store displays to better suit the diabetic consumer. Okay, so they write that down. You ask then, are there any sub-steps to this? And they may say, well, we may need to order additional supplies for the diabetic consumer. We don't have them all covered, so we want more. Or we need to get the marketing materials out here as well. We don't want to put them in the back room. So there may be some sub-steps. Just ask. Then you're going to go right across the page. At the top there, you will see blue circled numbers, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And you're going to have them fill this out as a group. Again, this is a group page, so you only need 1 of these 11 by 17 sheets. It's a group activity. So they write down their activity. We're going to redo our displays. You're going to ask them, who's responsible? Who's the person who is going to own this? So this has to be somebody who's going to basically be responsible for making sure this work takes place. Then you go to question 3. When will it be done? And just continue to go right across the top of that page there until you end up with, do we need a follow-up? Who else needs to be involved, etc. Okay? That, and then the final is basically, now that we've done all these, if we implemented this idea, what's it going to do for our store? What's the story that's been laid out before you? That is the staff map. And as you can see, the staff map sets up the 3-patient application. It makes the case for having patient education makes all the sense in the world. Now, the store may or may not have done a good job of telling everybody in the store, all the employees, the next hour of your 3-hour session with the store is going to be spent with that individual who has been identified as your facilitator. And what you're going to be taking them through is those pages, Roman numeral 1 through Roman numeral 8, and how that guide booklet's set up and what they need to do before, during, and after the session. We just did our staff map. All right. The next 3 applications, as I've been talking about, are managed for first, or the one they would sign up for first, if given a choice, would be your healthy eating and activity. And the psychology of that's pretty simple. If I was newly diagnosed with diabetes, the first thing I would want to do is be able to take control of my own condition. I'd want to be able to handle this without having injections. I don't have to go back to the doctor again. I don't want medication. I want to do this on my own. So tell me all about what I should eat and not eat, and I'll do that on my own. I don't need you guys. They may not come back until something goes wrong. And so what you want to do is lay the foundation for them, first with managing diabetes and medications, then with the monitoring map, and then with healthy eating and exercise. All right. So let's start with the managing diabetes and medications. This particular map application, again, the checklist for materials is going to be on page 1, so you see them all listed there. You'll have your facilitator's guide, your map, obviously, which is displayed right there for you. You've got your different cards listed there in bold, so you want to make sure you have all of those, your conversation topics, your body and diabetes, etc. So let me take you through what this map is all about. In this one, I'll go a little bit faster than I did with the pharmacy staff map, because some of this, being the healthcare experts that you are, these are going to be a little bit more in tune with what you guys have been teaching over the course of the past years. All right. In this particular application, we want people to understand what diabetes is and how it affects the body. We're going to talk about common myths and facts about the disease. We're going to talk about the basic targets and testing of blood glucose. We want them to understand what high and low blood glucose are. What is this phenomenon? We want them to understand the natural course of diabetes and the strategies for management. And then from there, we're going to have them focus on just one of those aspects. So we know, obviously, that the natural course of diabetes and strategies for management is either through healthy eating and exercise, oral medications, and then some form of injectable as your disease progresses or as you manage that, depending on where you come into the system. Well, in this particular map, we're going to focus on managing diabetes through medications and then goal setting. So those are the topics that are included in this particular map application. Again, don't forget, in each of these guide booklets, you have facilitator tips. So I would tell the group that, if you're going to split this particular map into 2 sections, doing 1-hour sections, that you may only be covering items 1 through 4, and that you'll cover 5 through 7 in session 2 if you decide to do that. Again, that's up to you as to what you want to do. All right? We go through the having them take an opportunity to look at the map visual, to explore it, to see what it's all about, to identify, so that as you begin to go through the questions, they say, oh yeah, I remember, we saw that up there at the right-hand corner or left-hand corner, wherever it may be. All right? Okay, so once we've set kind of the stage, so to speak, in Section A, we get into understanding diabetes. Now the good news is, in Section B, you're going to see some familiar pieces. So we get them to identify what they think diabetes is in their own words. So just like you guys had the pharmacy staff do, you're going to have the patients do the same thing. Then they're going to look at the actual definition, which is the same as what we gave to the pharmacy staff on their card. Then, from there, we get the group to look at how diabetes affects the body. So as you're looking into this gray box here, the next piece we do, and I didn't actually show you the actual questions or the picture of the thing since you've already seen it, but how the body works, that little 11 by 17 diagram with the blue side of people without diabetes and the tan side of people with diabetes, how the body works, we do the same exercise with these folks. So they're going to go through the same exact thing that the pharmacy staff went through. They're going to go through a series of cards on common myths and facts in Section B. So they're going to get that basic understanding of what diabetes is in Section B. In Section C, we then get them to focus on targets. Well, if that's if I've just gone through the basics of diabetes, now what do I need to know about the targets and where should my blood glucose levels be? So we're going to get them to look at the ABCs as identified by the ADA. So the ABCs being the A1C levels, B being the blood pressure, and C the cholesterol. So we're going to go through the ABCs. What are they? What should the numbers be? And they will look at that information, and it's also highlighted on the map itself. So they will have them in front of them. We will go through how and when to test blood glucose. So as you look on the left-hand side of the map, there will be specific signs which identify how they test their blood glucose levels and when they should test their blood glucose levels. All right? What happens, what the information can tell them. after they've tested them. So they'll look at the results about some of the strategies to keep people on target. So here we're talking about how do we keep my blood glucose levels within the targets we just talked about on the ABCs. How do we do that? Through eating, physical activity, and medications. And we talk about the natural progression of diabetes, much like we did in the pharmacy staff map. So we take them through that basic information in Section E. In Section F, we then get into medical terminology for it, but on each of the cards we have highlighted the product name, so those will be a little bit more familiar. What typically is going to happen, it'll be more familiar to them. We also go into the injectables. So we'll talk about the different types of insulin, what the insulin does, the basal insulin, the bolus, how those play into the body. We'll talk about the different types of injectable medications from your GLPs, etc., how those are coming out, why they're coming out now, etc., and how they impact the key learnings that they have, what do they want to do differently to manage their diabetes better, what some goals might be, how they're going to make the change, when they're going to make the change, and who they're going to. Okay? Again, the critical piece here is identifying the goal and then identifying the people who they need to involve in the process. We want them to reiterate that it's not a one-on-one situation, that everybody needs support, whether that's through their healthcare provider or from their family member or loved one, etc. We conclude with a summary of everything that they talked about in this particular map application. Again, we start out, if you think about this map, we start out at a high level with just basic understanding of diabetes and continue to funnel it down until we get down to the medications, some of the side effects, some of the more specific things as it pertains to them before we get into their goals. So it's always this kind of funnel approach in how we attack the information and subject. The next map that is in the series is the importance of monitoring and their diabetes. So in this particular map application, we're going to go over the ABCs again, but we're also going to look at some other key metrics or measures that they need to be aware of as their diabetes journey continues. So things such as eye testing, foot test, obviously getting their cholesterol checked on a regular basis, their blood pressure, etc. So all the various tests that they should be getting either on a regular office visit and or annually or somewhere in between there. Okay. We will get into information about knowing when to test, keeping records, what you can learn by tracking your numbers, understanding what impacts the numbers, and interpreting the results. So let me take you through this again, each section by section. I have not displayed the entire facilitator guide here, just the key sections that I'll walk you through, and then obviously you'll have your facilitator guide booklet that you can go through in detail. Again, a lot of this is going to be commonplace for many of you who have been doing this type of education. Again, page 1, I cannot reiterate this enough, it's all the same in every single booklet. You're going to have this checklist of materials and a picture of the map itself so you can see how it's all displayed. Section A, again, pretty much similar to the prior map in that we're going to go through the conversation topics. We're going to have people look at the map itself, the visual, so they can acquaint themselves with the visual, see what's all displayed there, see how it's laid out, so that as we go through the map session, as we go through the guide, they will see where things lay out and the flow of the map itself. As you'll see in all three maps, we pretty much go the same way. We start on the left-hand side, typically down at the bottom left-hand corner, go up and around the top, over to the right-hand side, and finish at the bottom right-hand corner. There's a logical reason for that. That's how people look at historical timelines in the United States. If we were in China, we might look at this differently because they read right to left, we read left to right. We learn left to right. So that's why it makes sense to visually display it that way. Okay, section B. In this, again, we're going to look at the various measures. We're going to reiterate and review the ABCs. We're going to talk about the monitoring, the reasons you monitor. is to avoid and reduce the complications, and then we're going to talk about the other important measures that they need to look at. Everything from glaucoma test, eye test, foot checks every time they go in to see the doctor or podiatrist, skin checks, etc. So we will go through all those very critical measures, again, as laid out by the ADA. Then we're going to take them back to the one test that they're probably going to, not probably, but they do every day, at least once, if not more, and that is the testing of their blood glucose levels, the pinprick. And we're going to talk to them about the signs on the left-hand side of the map. How do they do that? The benefits of regular testing, and the tips for achieving the most accurate test results. So they'll be very specific. And some of this information on testing they'll be able to take away with them, because on the back side of their goal sheet, that information will be laid out for them. All right, in section D, we're going to go through very specifically on when to test and why. So here at the top center of your map, you'll see several different clock images identified, and we're going to go through a matching exercise on what you can learn when you test at various points of the day. 2 hours before a meal, 2 hours after a meal, after exercising, when you first wake up or break a fast, etc. And we go through different examples and what you can learn by testing at particular times and what those tests will show you. In section E, we'll talk about the importance of keeping a record. Now, many of the folks will already have record booklets. If they do not, record booklets will be made available through the local Cardinal sales representative. So if you want to connect with them, they can do that. They can also download a printable copy of a log booklet or record booklet from the ADA, and we've provided the website there. So we want to really reiterate to them how important it is to keep track of their blood glucose levels daily, and then begin to look at what do those results tell us. So in this particular section, we're going to talk about the importance of keeping it and then what they can learn from those test results. In section F, we're going to talk about what impacts the numbers. So now that we know when to test and what those results will tell us, now let's look at what's impacting those numbers. So what's caused a spike at a certain point in time, what's caused a drop in my blood glucose levels. And so we will look at some of the various things that can impact or cause a person's blood glucose levels to move outside its target range, and then what you can begin to do to stay within the target range. What are the different tactics and activities and mechanisms they can use to keep things within their target range. In section G, we have an exercise where we have them look at two different examples of someone's test results. And we get them to identify what do the test results tell you. And so they're going to look at patterns in the blood glucose numbers, what they may tell somebody, and examples and answers and responses are provided in the guide booklet for each of those two examples. If you have an opportunity, based on timing, if they have their record booklets, now would be a great time for them to bring out their own and do their own interpretation of their own results. That's provided for in this particular section. As we conclude, as we always do, we're going to have them identify a plan for using their monitoring results. So they're going to set a goal based on the conversation. They're going to look at the 2 or 3 most important things they learned during the session. They're going to look at a tip or hint from the back side of the sheet. So on the back of their goal sheet is a tip or hint about how to test and what your testing can show you. So they'll have that information right there on their goal sheet. They're going to pick one of them. They're going to identify a goal for that. Then they're going to identify a time mechanism for when it's going to take place or when they want to see changes be made by, and then who they need to support them. Then we'll summarize after they get done setting up their goals, etc. All right. Again, I would order medications first, monitoring second, before we get into this particular MAP application, which is all about benefits of healthy eating and physical activity. This one will probably look the most familiar to many of you if you've gone through the Merck Journey for Control program. Much of the content is very similar to what we had in their program. It may just be set up in different stages or different sequence. So we're going to talk about managing diabetes with healthy eating and physical activity. We're going to talk about myths and facts about healthy eating, the basics of it, knowing what to eat, how much to eat, when to eat, dealing with challenges that can impact healthy eating, examining the importance of staying active, suggestions on how much activity is needed, what types of activity, and how to deal with some challenges that may occur to keep you on track as far as being active. Again, I'm going to go through the key points or key sections in this particular application, not each and every question. Page 1 looks pretty familiar, still has the map at the top, and then a checklist of materials. Introduction, again, set up the same way as all the other maps, where we're going to look at how the map visual is set up. We're going to talk about the content or topics that we're going to explore in this particular map application, etc. So very similar. Getting them to look at the visual is important. All right, section B, keeping in balance. In this particular section, we're going to talk about the benefits of healthy eating as it relates to managing diabetes, and then the benefits of keeping active. So utilizing both aspects in order to manage their diabetes, which is going to be talked about over and over again for these folks as they go through the progression of their disease. Section C will look at the myths and facts about food and healthy eating. There's many myths out there about healthy eating. We're going to try and dispel some of those by looking at some of the key ones and where they can find accurate information about healthy eating. Again, many of these myths and facts you've seen before. They're available on the ADA website. In section D, we're going to look at the basics of healthy eating, their feelings about making changes to their diet, and then some basics about healthy eating, portion control, knowing when to eat, etc. We'll explore what to eat, the different types of food, from carbohydrates to fats to proteins, etc. We'll provide them with tips for selecting and shopping for food. We'll talk about food labels and how to read those and what that means for them in their shopping for particular food types, what foods they can eat more of and less of. So we'll look at, again, portion control. We'll look at the healthy or my plate during this particular section. Section F is the how much and when to eat. Again, we have signs. You'll look at the top center of your map and you'll look at information about how much to eat using the hands as a means of measuring your portions, as well as obviously the plate mechanism as well. And then the importance of when you eat. So making sure you're not skipping meals, making sure you eat a healthy breakfast, etc., breaking that fast, etc. In section G, we look at meal planning strategies for healthy eating. So we'll look at meal planning, how to make sure that as you go shopping for various foods, you're planning out your meals for the week, and what you can do to set a plan for yourself going forward. In section H, we're going to go through dealing with challenges, and this will do with everything from eating out on weekends to vacations to festivals. How do you handle the holidays? What do you do if you have to skip a meal for work or whatever purpose? How do you handle some of those challenges that occur on a day in and day out basis with eating? Keeping a food diary and a record of what they ate, how much, and when they ate, and why that makes a difference, and how they can utilize that information. That will be dealt with in section H. Next, we get into keeping active. What keeping active means, some recommendations for activities that they can engage in to get started, anything from parking their car a little bit further away from the grocery store entrance or the workplace entrance, etc., just mere walking, playing with their kids, etc. Recommendations on how much activity to get, So whether that's 5, 10 minutes, 10 minutes can make a big difference in somebody. It doesn't have to be out there running a marathon. We want them to know that a little bit helps. But the key is to do it consistently and on a daily basis. Challenges they might encounter for keeping active and how to overcome some of those challenges. Getting somebody to work with them or stay active with them. Doing things as a group. Having somebody remind them, etc. In section J, this is our goal setting area. So here we're going to get them to set a goal based on the conversation, how they can involve their loved ones in helping to achieve those goals. Again, on the back side of this particular goal sheet, there are some tips for them. Make sure you remind those of them about healthy eating and activity. I think on the managing, I did not mention this, but in the managing diabetes and medications, there are tips for key questions to always ask your doctor. Sometimes people forget, especially the men in the group, forget to ask their doctor questions or aren't very good about it. So that's a good way to remind them, is just to give them a cue card on the back, what to ask the doctor as they go. The conclusion then, again, we summarize everything that we talked about in this particular MAP application. All right, those are the MAP applications and content. Again, each of you should have received a PDF copy of each of the facilitator guides. The front portions, just to summarize, are all the same. It deals with the methodology. It talks about what to do before, during, and after a session. And then you get into the specifics of that particular MAP application, from what's inside the kit to the actual questions and the cards that you will encounter. I encourage you to read through all of those. If you have questions about any of the content, about anything to do with your role as a coach, please feel free to email us at learn@healthyinteractions.com, and we will be more than happy to respond to those as soon as possible. We wish you the best of success and luck as you go out and work with the independent pharmacists. We're here to help, so take care, and again, good luck.